All right, good mornings and greetings from South Georgia, USA. Greetings to the world. We're out here in one section of the orchard. We have about 15 trees here, persimmons, oranges, and olives. And it is getting hot here in South Georgia, and we're starting to think about our watering and how best to do it. Now, if I'm going to stand around and water each tree, it's going to take too much time. So we had an old hose, and we were going to cut that hose into sections and put a drip system on it. But when we got to the store and checked the fittings, the new fittings, the brass fittings, they were so high that it was ridiculous. So the fittings of the hoses were so expensive that we decided it made more sense to buy new hoses that already have the fittings attached. So we bought 25-foot cheap, the light duty hoses, and the idea is they're 25 feet, and that is to hook them together, and so at every 25 feet we can undo the hose a little bit so that it drips. And then with 5 hoses, then you can have 5 drip stations, and you can place them where you want them. And so this real light duty hose here, this Best Garden, was like $12. Says it's guaranteed 3 years. The other ones are heavier. They were like $20-something. But all is said and done, if this lasts 2 or 3 years, it's going to be well worth it. And not having to cut hoses and put new hardware on them and all that. Inflation is really getting ridiculous. So I'm going to hook it up and show you what I mean and how I'm going to do it. And we are going to have rivers of living water coming out of this drip system. And well, that's a saying from the Bible, and I have that lesson lined up to talk about the rivers of living water. Okay. All right, now here's how this system works. Here is my first 25-foot section where it joins it together. Now when I loosen it, it drips. So I've got a drip system right there. And this will be repeated 5 times to go from tree to tree. And you can adjust how much you want it to drip so that they all get some. Close it and it quits. And we want this thing to drip up here on this olive tree. Like that. And then we've got the next section up there at that tree, and now we're going to join to it. And we'll be able to do multiple trees at the same time. You ready? Mm-hmm. All right, now I've got this one. I still got it running, and I'm getting wet a little bit, but I want to show you how to unroll a hose. You got to unroll it the first time like this. If you just uncoil it and let it, pull it out without rolling it, you're gonna twist your hose every time it pulls out a loop. This is a little bit more trouble, but you will be having a flat hose when you do it. So now, all right, we are at the end of the 5 hoses. Now this has to have a shutoff valve on it, because if it doesn't, 90% of your water is going to come out here. So we want to have something on here
Stopping.
amount that comes out from the end. So there we are. So we've got 1, 2, 3. This one's dripping good. This one is dripping pretty good, but I can just undo it a little bit. Let it drip more. This one right here, I'll adjust it. Oh. This one right here is dripping in the air, so we'll just put it up like that so it'll. And this one right here is dripping quite well. All right, now I'm going to do my Bible lesson now, and it has to do with water. And I'm going to do that, but I'm going to seek a place in the shade, and I'm going to let this water run for an hour or 2 or 3. Instead of me watering each tree by hand, I got 5 trees being watered. And there is certainly a possibility of adding a hose onto the end over there and getting another tree. Or there's another possibility, and that is to put a splitter right here at the first joint and run another 25-foot hose in that direction. And that will get 2 more. But this is all the hoses we bought. Okay, we are seeking shade. All right, back again. Now we are in the shade. And this is a bed of ivy that we planted years ago, and it has done very well up under these oak trees. The ducks and the turkeys, there's one over there, like very much to get in this in the middle of the day, and they are well hidden, and they can seek the shade also. All right, now I showed you a DIY, do-it-yourself tree watering system that will water 5 trees at once, as long as those trees aren't more than 25 feet apart. Instead of standing there doing it, and then of course it doesn't get done when you have to count on yourself, but now that whole system costs less than $100, brand new hose. And it said it was 3-year guarantee on the cheap ones. So we'll assume that that will last 3 years, maybe more. So the other 2 new, more expensive ones are longer than that. Let's just say 3 years. So that would be $30 a year for the infrastructure. $30 a year. I would save that much money in 1 afternoon for my labor cost if I was having to do that by hand. It is well worth the effort. And if you live in a hot climate like we do, these trees need water. Now they'll live without water, and sometimes we have a lot of rain and sometimes we don't. But my research on olive trees is that olive trees are drought tolerant. However, they do respond to frequent watering. In other words, they grow better. They grow faster. All right, now we're going to do a little lesson from Exodus 17 on the New King James, in the New King James Bible, that has to do with water. Water is absolutely necessary for the trees and for human life and for animal life. Now the children of Israel were escaped from Egypt, and they were way out in the wilderness or the desert. And there was no water. And the people were complaining. They said, basically, are you going to let us die of thirst out here? We were better off in Egypt where there was the Nile River, plenty of water. And they were about to stone Moses, even though God had miraculously delivered them from Egypt, had parted the Red Sea for them to cross, and done many other miracles. This is human nature. They were now complaining. And the Lord said to Moses, Moses says, God, what do I do? These people are about to stone me. And the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. They would be witnesses. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, the Nile River, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel. Meribah means complaining. And because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Now Moses struck the rock with his staff, with his stick, and the water came pouring forth. Now this is at the beginning of their trip, their 40 years in the desert. So some of the people were not born yet that ended up going into the land of Israel, because they were out there 40 years. And while they were out there for 40 years, all of the adults that came up out of Egypt died and were buried in the wilderness. And the only people then would have been their children and their grandchildren. Some of them would have been somewhere near 40 years old and down. This was the first miracle of striking the rock. I'm going to tell you the next time. Now at the end of their 40 years, the story happened again. And the people were out of water again. Now this would have been a new set of people, because all of the old ones that had witnessed the first miracle in the rock were almost all dead. And this was a new set of people that, by and large, most of them never saw the first miracle. So the people were complaining again. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, that would be the same staff or rod, and your brother Aaron, and gather the congregation together. Speak to the rock before their eyes. Notice this time he told Moses not to strike the rock, but to speak to the rock. And notice this time that it was the congregation that he gathered together. So the whole bunch of them were there. And it was in a place, I think, that many people could gather and still see the large rock. It was a split rock. So Moses did not speak to the rock. God said, speak to the rock, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals. So Moses took the rod or the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, Hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Now you see, that's not what God told Moses to do. He didn't tell Moses to give them a tongue lashing, call them rebels, and he didn't tell Moses, and Moses was claiming that we bring water. That would be he and Aaron. Well, of course, Moses didn't bring the water. This is God that brought the water when Moses spoke to it. But he didn't speak to it. He spoke to the people and gave them a tongue lashing. Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Notice the difference. He wasn't supposed to strike the rock. He was supposed to speak to it. And he certainly wasn't supposed to strike it twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and said this, Because you did not believe me and hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. This was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. So God told Moses to speak to the rock. He didn't tell them to bless the people out. And Moses also took credit when he said, must we. Now he might have meant himself and God, or he might have meant himself and his brother Aaron. I think it was his brother. Might have been his nephew. Don't know that one for absolute certainty, but it was one of them. Now let me tell you the significance of the whole thing. All right. Jesus is known as the rock. So when Moses and Jesus also brings forth the water, the living water. So this rock represented Jesus. And the first time that Moses struck the rock with his staff, that represented Jesus dying on the cross to bring us the living, eternal water if we believed on his name. Now, at the end of their 40 years in the desert, it happened again. The people ran out of water. Well, the miracle needed to be repeated because the people that saw the first miracle were essentially all dead. And this miracle needed to be done again so that the ones that were born in the wilderness, that had grown up now, that had not seen the first miracle now, could see it again. And it would be fresh in their mind when they entered the promised land, crossed over Jordan. The second time around, Moses disobeyed God. He was supposed to speak to the rock. Now this represents that once Jesus dies and has been stricken and died on the cross, it doesn't need to be done again. Jesus said, my work is finished. He doesn't have to die again. That was the end of it. He had done the work that was given him. Now, because of his dying on the cross, all we have to do is speak to Jesus. Jesus, save me. He doesn't get to be struck again with a rod. He's been struck. Out of him will come living waters. That's why God told Moses and Aaron, I will not let you lead the people over the Jordan into the promised land, because they had disobeyed him. It was a type of punishment and the punishment, of course, was given also as a lesson so that we could understand that Jesus died or was struck and killed, and that the water then came out of him, and that we would get that living water by believing that story and by saying, yes, Jesus, you died for me. I want to have the water that once I drink it, I will never thirst, the eternal water. Another name for that is being born again. All right, you can read these two accounts. It's a little confusing because it happened two different times. I think that it was the same rock, though, but that they had circled around for 40 years and had wound up back at that rock again. And they were in the same shape. They didn't have any water. Now, Moses was not allowed to go. He was allowed to look from a high mountain at the promised land, but he died there, and God hid his body. And Moses did not go into the promised land. That's a lesson to us to understand. Jesus was struck once for all time, and that's the end of it. All right, that's the story of how Jesus is the living water and how he was struck and died for us to give us that living water. And there's many scriptures that talk about Jesus as a stone, and there are many scriptures that talk about the water. But we will do them later because this is enough right here. Now, I will mention this. When Jesus died on the cross and the Roman soldier speared him in the side to make sure he was dead, it said, out came blood and water. So that was the sacrificial blood of Jesus, and that was the living water that came out. All right, I hope this lesson spurred you to think about water, about the living water, and I think it would be very good to read these. It's a good little story, and it's not very long. You'll find it in Exodus 17, and then later in Numbers 20. And these two strikings of the rock took place somewhere around 40 years apart. I'm not a Bible scholar. This is what I think it is. If I'm wrong, if they took place close to each other, somebody give me a comment and show me where you found that. I do not know. I do make mistakes, I think. And I think that these two different places, I believe it was the same rock, and I believe it was 40 years apart. All right, that's what I have to say about it. Would you guys out there, and you gals out there, and you children out there, say the Lord's Prayer with us? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.